We've got a much worse situation. We've got 3 packers controlling 87%. Today, those 4 packers control 87% of the beef, lamb, and pork processing, with 1 packer, IBP, controlling 38%. This is the kicker. If you don't understand the problem, listen up. This is going to do it for you. In 1979, the producer received 64% of the consumer beef dollar. USDA statistics show by May of 1996, the producer share slipped to 44%, representing a 20% loss in share. Why did we lose that share? Feedlots quit negotiating price. It's not your fault. We, the feedlots, quit negotiating with packers. We didn't have any choice. They got so concentrated. They got so many captive cattle. They got so many of their own that we couldn't sell ours. We simply couldn't sell cattle. And like I said, if we can't sell them, we don't get paid, you don't get paid. We are intimidated as a feed yard industry. We've got 5 minutes to make our mind up. I can't even get a hold of my customer that fast. He's out in the pickup checking his cows, fixing the water gap, pulling a calf. I can't find him. So we feed him another week. Or he says, just do whatever you think. Well, that's a great deal. You simply can't sell fat cattle today. It is a terrible situation. They're dictating to us. They tell us, take it or leave it. Next week it's going to be lower. There was a feeder out in Nebraska. This is documented. It's been sent to the Justice Department. There was a feeder out in Nebraska that always sold his cattle at IVP. But Montford kind of checked on him from time to time. And he called Montford one day and he said, what do you give me in the beef? And he said, well, we'll give you 106 in the meat. And he said, okay, thank you. And he picked up the phone, called IVP, and they said, well, we'll give you 102. The guy said, wait a minute. I'm not going to do that. He said, Montford just bid me 106. They said, just wait. Watch the market at 10:30. It's going lower. We went from 90 points higher to 150 points lower at 10:30 in the morning. Not good. We're intimidated. And we are not having any fun. We're exporting capital from your ranches and from our feed yards at a wholesale rate right now. What does that 20% loss in that consumer beef dollar represent? Of the current $1,827 per head retail beef value, this 20% represents $365 per head loss to the producer. Put in perspective, from March of 1980 to 1996, the 4 major packers' share of the beef, lamb, and pork slaughter increased from 36% to 87%. And the producer share of the consumer meat dollar dropped from 64 to 44%. Consumer prices for beef have steadily increased. Now you hear from cattle packs and NCBA that they've come down. They're wrong. They are wrong. Consumer prices include retail, hotel, restaurant, and export. And today, the best beef goes overseas and into the restaurant trade. We've got a deteriorating product at retail. Consumers aren't happy. In reality, there was only one packer. IBP leads the way and the other packers follow. I was at a New Mexico stock growers meeting. A bunch of TCFA guys were there, Texas Cattle Feeders Association. They were there to see what I had to say. And I was a little nervous that there was packer representatives there as well. And the TCFA has not taken a stand on this issue. And when I was giving my talk, I said, we were talking about the 3 major packers, and I said, but really there's only one. And one of the guys in the front row put his hand up and he said, you're right, there's only one. He said, IBP leads the way, the other packers follow. As stated in the July issue of Calf News, one Canadian feeder said, this is Canada, IBP is the price leader here. They always have been and always will be. In a 1992 Wall Street Journal article entitled, IBP Gobbles Up Weak Rivals in Meat Packing Industry, a Kansas marketing consulting firm said, IBP is perhaps the best predatory pricer I've seen. From 1993 to 1995, IBP showed a profit increase of slightly over 350%. The first half of 96 has surpassed 1995. The cattleman has suffered as much as 40 to 50% drop in prices in the same period. The consumer is paying the same or more for less quality and consistency. Herman Schumacher got me involved in this deal. So if I end up gone or missing, or Herman didn't do it, but it's his fault. It's like somebody asked, was it you, Herman, that asked Les Messenger who starts his car for him in the morning? But I guess I've been talking about this thing for about 10 years. It started in my office with an IBP buyer about 10 years ago. And he said, don't go on the formula. He said, if they get enough of those cattle, you're not going to like what happens. And we've been talking about the formula captive supplies for a long time, and I'm kind of known in my area for not being in favor of concentration. I think there's two really bad things. Concentration is one of them, and a trade deficit is the other. Trade deficits, you're exporting your wealth, and that's what we're doing. We've talked about that tonight. But anyway, Herman called me up one day. They were having their concentration meeting, their panel meeting in Washington. He said, Mike, this is the last one. I hadn't ever met Herman, but someone had told him about me, and he called me and he said, we'd like for you to testify. And I said, I was really hoping somebody else would. And no one else had. No other beat yard had testified. So I did. And I decided, since I'm going to do this, I just as well do it all the way. But in my testimony, I said, I've been asked the question, do you think there's unfair trade in the marketing of live cattle? My answer is yes. Do you think there's price fixing and monopolistic activity in the meat packing and processing? My answer is absolutely, without question, and it is also widespread in other areas of agriculture. We have got a problem in the cattle industry, but you don't have to look very far to see it's also in the grains. Look at what ADM has done. They just approved 2 more mergers for ADM. I read it in the paper this week, Feedstuffs Magazine. They just got nailed for price fixing on lysine. Again, they've been accused or indicted for price fixing in high fructose corn syrup. It just goes on and on. I've had ADM people tell me they don't want to be in the business if they can't fix the price. We have got a major problem in corporate America today. We've allowed them to merge too much. There's an alternative to price fixing that keeps you out of jail. It accomplishes all the same things, but it keeps you out of jail. It's called a merger. You can merge, fix the price, with one more benefit. Actually, maybe a few more. Big one, though, is you get to fire half the people. We've got to stop it. We've got to allow competition. The more we merge, the more we concentrate, the less competition that we have. IBP employee Curtis Pohl was asked under oath in the IBP Incorporated versus Robert Cook trial. And the Robert Cook trial was a result of the Gotch litigation I told you about in 1994. They sued the attorney. Gotch dropped the litigation, but they sued the attorney. And he was asked in that trial, is it always in IBP's best interest, as you perceive those interests, Mr. Pohl, that IBP buy cattle for slaughter as inexpensively as possible? Answer, yes. Question, is there an exception that you can think of to that statement? A time when it would not be necessarily in IBP's interest to buy live cattle as inexpensively as it can? Answer, no. The packer today has a powerful new weapon developed by IBP that ensures least cost. This weapon has the capabilities of eliminating small packer competition and forcing beef producers' prices far below their cost of production. Over the last several years, IBP has become very skilled in its use. The weapon is called the formula, capital F on the formula. This is not value-based marketing. The formula is the equivalent of a nuclear warhead in the arsenal of captive supplies. The formula has nothing to do with value-based marketing or risk management. A lot of you don't know what the formula is. I know Johnny mentioned it and asked you, and most of you didn't raise your hand, but let me go through an explanation that makes it more clear. The formula is an agreement between the feed yard and IBP which effectively commits all the cattle from the feed yard to IBP. The details of the formula are negotiable and vary depending on the feed yard. IBP takes no risk and invests no money. In other words, the or something is the formula where they don't have to take risk or invest money. That beats feeding cattle. That's a better deal. They don't take risk and they don't invest money. The feedlot eliminates the worry of selling cattle and frees up considerable management time. The price is determined in most cases by the cash price paid at the Garden City IBP plant in Kansas and Texas Panhandle plants. Determining a fair cash price becomes impossible as the percentage of formula cattle increases. It gives them leverage. We talked about the loss of the producer share of the consumer dollar. This is where it's happening, right here. We're losing it in price negotiation. Supplied with formula captive inventory, IBP can stay out of the cash market for extended periods and only buy enough cash cattle so as to determine the formula price. Formula feed yards are able to move cattle on time with lower feeding costs and, depending on the agreement, at higher prices compared to non-formula feed yards. The P&S Act, the basis of our case, the P&S Act prohibits discrimination, preferential treatment, or giving advantage to any particular person or locality. During March and April of 1994, IBP stepped out of the cash market and drew from formula cattle supplies. And this is what brought on the Gotch litigation. Live cattle prices dropped from $77 to $62. Thursday, May 2nd, 1996, the market jumped from $54 to $60 in 2 hours. It is understood that two of the largest formula suppliers were unable to supply cattle for 2 weeks, forcing IBP to compete for cash cattle. There is potentially no limit to the downside effects this can have on the cash market, given sufficient numbers of formula cattle. Any number of formula cattle is bad, and a large number completely destroys equitable price discovery. When you see that kind of volatility, when you give IBP leverage and take their leverage, it's cause and effect. It proves itself. Today's low cattle prices have nothing to do with cattle cycles or oversupply. The problem is a lack of competition and price discovery and the existence of a powerful, politically strong packer monopoly. With captive supplies, it is easier for the packer to buy cattle cheaper than to sell meat higher. The problem we've got is the packer goes the course of least resistance. He simply is going to beat up on the feeder if it's easier to do that. We have no one defending the price to the retailer to sell the meat higher. So the margin widens. Captive supplies have allowed the packer and retailer their widest margins in history at the direct expense of the producer. An economist and ex-employee of one of the major packers who cleared over $3.5 billion worth of cattle and hog payments across his desk has said, they always beat up on the feeders to increase their margins. The feeder is the course of least resistance. Given captive supplies, how much are cattle worth if they don't need them? A Scott County, Kansas feed yard operator, when asked about low cattle prices, stated, "This is price fixing. It's packer concentration." Got one more on the team. But I tried to get him to speak for me at a meeting on Kobe that I couldn't make on Friday. He wouldn't do it. They don't want to step out and take the risk of being blackballed. We've got a lot of media that is supporting packer concentration. They advertise in their papers. They are where the money comes from, the big corporations. When Pat was talking about the NCBA convention there in Nashville, saying it looked like a corporate convention, reminded me I was watching the Republican convention on TV the last couple of days. Those corporations are there, and they are entertaining to the fullest extent the delegates. They are buying the votes, they're buying the support, and it's not good. You've got to have grassroots representation run from the bottom up. One ag industry writer states, NCBA has a responsibility to lead, drag, force, kick kicking and screaming beef producers into coordinated production systems, just as the National Pork Producers Council has led pork producers. According to USDA, pork has lost more market share than beef. One leading South Carolina pork producer said, at the current rate, within 5 years, there will not be an independent pork producer left. The lowest cost producer is the family operation, but they give up the cost advantage when they are denied equal market access. Top-down vertical integration enslaves the producer, threatens the family, the food supply, and rural America. Same thing's happening in cattle. We're destroying rural America, rural Montana. The money's being sucked up. We've got to stop it. We've got to enforce the PNS Act, and that's what we're going to do, and need your help. The Packer's hiding behind studies. That's his explanation. That's been his answer to everyone that's asking about the lawsuit. Let me make a comment on the studies. The cattlemen's own representatives, the NCBA, the Kansas Livestock Association, the Texas Cattle Feeders Association, have all either actively promoted the Packers' position or at best stayed on the fence on the issue of captive supply. To this day, NCBA and KLA blame low cattle prices on oversupply. 100-year-old family-owned Standard Meat Company, Lincoln, Nebraska, says there is a critical shortage of high-quality meat, and meat prices have no correlation with live cattle prices. He said that following Randy Block's Cattle Facts presentation that showed how live cattle prices have tracked retail, or retail tracked live cattle. 25 years ago, Standard Meat Company pioneered some of the first export business to Japan, only to be priced out by the big packers. Standard does no business there now. And recent reports show a high level of foreign importer dissatisfaction with the arrogance, poor service, and products of the big packers. As one researcher stated, one could assume in a more competitive market these buyer issues would have been addressed. This is a researcher that I'm going to quote again here. NCBA's got a researcher that's saying some things. His name hasn't been mentioned tonight, but we've talked about it. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to tell you what his name is. NCBA and KLA are unfazed by the drop in the producer's share of the consumer's beef dollar. They totally ignore the comparison of live cattle prices to consumer prices. They ignore the formula's devastation of price discovery. NCBA economist Chuck Lambert distorts, twists, and misstates the facts. One leading industry spokesman, in reference to the NCBA, said, "Let me know if you have any ideas for an attack plan, including getting a job for Lambert at IDP, where he belongs." Their policy opposes government regulation of private business transactions. That is the argument they're giving to any senator, congressman that asks them about concentration. They say, do not regulate private business transactions. Do they believe the PNS Act and antitrust laws that protect free enterprise and open competition should not be enforced? Speaking of regulating private business transactions, I wonder how they feel about other forms of price fixing and market manipulation. These are top-down run organizations, not grassroots. I'm a member of both KLA and NCA. And I say all I can. The joke is every week when my fax hits the KLA office, they think it's pretty funny. Here's another Calicrate message. My ex-attorney works there, so I kind of know what's going on. The studies. As far as the studies are concerned, the government stands quietly by and continues to waste producers' money on concentration studies. One highly respected PhD of econometrics called the conclusions of the studies extremely biased, inconsistent, and seriously flawed. He states, in conclusion, it is extremely unfortunate that even though every fed cattle producer with a Monday morning show list feels the pressure from captive supply, university professors and government agents did not insist on the utmost rigor in providing credible research and quantifying the severity of this pressure. Another Center of Rural Affairs who was represented on the USDA concentration panel states, academic economists should be required to publicly disclose the source and amount of compensation they receive from consulting in the private sector. The studies are flawed, they're incorrect. Packer concentration does affect distribution of the consumer dollar back to the producer. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mike had brought an overhead, which he didn't get to, but for reason of questions, to prompt your questions, I'm sure it'll be very handy. With that, I want everybody to kind of stand up and stretch just a little bit, and then we're going to do the questions. Come on, you guys, you've been sitting there a while. Just stretch. Anybody leaves the room, though, you're going to get busted. Yeah, you're not going to want to miss the question and answer deal. Why don't you stretch this a little? That'll help you out a little bit and kind of free you up. Because we don't want to lose you, because we want your questions. There's never going to be another time to ask these people pertinent things that are going to revolutionize the way you think. Hopefully, if they haven't stimulated your thought processes by now, it's probably too late. But we're going to work on that too. Okay, have a chair. Let's get to these questions. You got staff. Just stay standing, sir. That's fine. Yeah. As we get started with this, I'll try to repeat them. If you can't hear them, I'll try to repeat the questions. And if you would, name the person that you want to direct it to, and then sing out loud and clear so everybody can hear your question. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Ken Davenport, and I'm a small producer in McLeod, Montana, and I want to talk at George Paul.
George Paul, this is for you.
Ironically, yesterday, I had a special car I wanted to sell in Australia. I called the counsel's office for Australia in Los Angeles to find out how I do it and if it was a duty. He said the duty is 60% on that car, selling price. I thought I had a bad connection. I asked the second time, 60%. My question to you is, on 250,000 metric tons of imported beef in a given period, what's the percentage of import tax from that beef in the United States?
That's an excellent question.
Would you repeat it before you start, David?
How much would the import tax be on 250,000 tons of Australian beef? And I'm going to one-up Pat Goggins a little bit. Pat said there were barriers and tariffs and things like that until GATT showed up, and then all that stuff, went away. Any protection, if you will, for our markets went away with GATT. Well, and I know Pat knows this, but actually it was the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement that lowered some of those barriers, because I'll tell you, the tariff on that was probably zip. Because again, what the Australians learned in about 92, and somebody correct me if I got that figure wrong, but I think it was about 92. What happened was the Australians learned that instead of importing their beef through like Long Beach, if they did that, it counted against the import quota for tonnage. They had a 4-cent per pound import tariff that they had to pay, and every ounce of it was inspected. But what they learned was, instead of offloading at Long Beach and taking it on up the California coast to Canada, and then bringing it to the interior of Canada and bringing it down through our northern border, because then it falls under the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, that they escaped all of that. There's no import quota on Australian meat that comes down here from Canada. There's no 4-cent per pound tax. And at that time, there was no inspection, and there's still no inspection. So I would seriously doubt that they paid anything. And especially like what Pat was saying, since GATT, all that tariff stuff has kind of gone, no pun intended, gone south anyway. But that's some of the problems with it.
Okay, thank you, George. Next. Go ahead, Dean, stand up.
This little pitch, on the table over there, there's a sheet if you want to donate on this lawsuit. Anything people can afford would help. There's a post office box in Amarillo, the other thing that was brought up here is that we have laws in the books that can deal with the formula problems, the capital supply problems. Don't let your elected representatives tell you we need new laws. We need enforcement of the ones we have. And frankly, the U.S. Congress would know a free market if it fits everybody else. We don't need to start open that law. We need enforcement of what's been there. And in 1921, people understood free markets better than the Congress does today, and we need to protect what we've got. I think Tim Johnson's introduced something with a goodwill, but I think he's wrong to open that law. We need enforcement. We don't need excuses from the Congress on this. But give some money. It's not. We ought to start acting like we're in a fight for our lives.
Go ahead, Herb.
If you look at, if you look at the formula thing, and I'm sure you're still probably as confused, and I'm not going to claim to be a expert on it, but when you talk about the 1921 law, and you got to go back and listen to what Mike had to say about nobody speaking up. You have to, the feedlot managers, they're afraid to come out and speak against the packer for fear of being blackballed. Blackball means for fear of not being able to sell their fat cattle. Mike can attest to that. And it's going to be hard. It's impossible. And Mike, I don't know, Johnny and I, we met with the Justice Department out in Washington, D.C. We met with Annie Bingham, and she said, hey, we're on this, but we can't, if nobody speaks up, you ain't got a case. So, and legislatively, I just think it's something that, we've got a completely different, more complex system than we had back in 1921. And it's going to take legislation to correct it.
We've got a flexible law. I really think we've got to be careful on that one, honest to God.
When you talk about formula, here's one thing, I just got to say this, and I hope you guys understand it. I think where your illegalities come in the formula, is the type of cattle that get to be fed under the formula. And by that I mean they're able to put these Mexican cattle that they can buy for $30 a hundred less and put them on feed. And a lot of these cattle can get to be pretty efficient because they get pretty agey. They're 2-3 years old. They can feed pretty efficiently. And then they get to bring them cattle up to the standards that we raise out here. And in essence, what I'm saying is they're getting the same for their cattle as we're getting for our good cattle. And I think that's where your illegalities come in. And to prove it is I think it's something that can be done, but I think it starts from where they put the feeders on. Now, help me out if you can a little bit, Leo.
I think you covered it.
You think I got it? And I think that's one place. But, I think that's something that it's so great to see Farmers Union and Farm Bureau join in this together. Johnny and I and our association, we've about bled it dry. And I think if you folks would all keep on your legislators, stay active like Pat said, and I do think that something good and positive can come out of it. It's happened before, it will come again.
Okay, we have a question right here, sir.
It isn't exactly a question I'd like to make. One minute.
Less than a minute, please.
Yeah. I'll talk.
Joe, we'll hear
We're talking about restoring competition in a free market. My name is Tom Breipa. I'm a farmer and rancher northeast Montana. I'm a retired farmer and rancher. I am past chair of Northern Plains. I am present chair of Western Organization Resource Council's Ag Issue Team. We want Dan Gluckman to implement a 3-point rule under the Packers and Stockyards Act. Number 1, it's up there, prohibit direct packer feeding unless those animals are sold in a public market. Number 2, to prohibit packers from using formula or basis pricing on forward contracts for slaughter supply. And number 3, prohibit trading of forward contracts for slaughter supplies unless those contracts are offered in a public manner. Now, I stand in awe of all of these gentlemen. But what they have said is absolutely correct. We are hoping that this is the first step in creating competitive market. We think this three-point plan will, with forward contracts, priced forward contracts, will make the market a price raiser instead of a price depressant and price breaker. We think that factor concentration is costing Montana cow-calf producers between 15 and 35 cents because the feeders have to make money, and so they're reducing their prices. We have an economic chart here that says if the difference in price is $250, and they have said it was $360, the impacts to the state of Montana are between $1.68 billion and $2.42 billion. All of these things come from our friend over here and the Montana study. We need your help. We beg your help. We have to have every group that is here tonight. We have on hand some petitions that you can sign that will go to Mr. Glickman, and it will request those three regulations. In the near future, we will be filing a legal request with USDA to implement these regulations. Now, we had a meeting with Jim Baker last year. A lot, if I may, Baker, a lot of you people gave him hell. Believe me. As soon as he went back, he must have said something to Dan Glickman. At any rate, an IVP action came soon after he went back. It was a case that was on the shelf. They dusted it off and filed it. IVP is today requesting a delay of proceedings until after the first of the year. I talked to Mr. Baker not too long ago. I asked him whether he had any input into the studies that the Undersecretary was working with. He said, not really. I asked him if he knew anything about the stuff that Mr. Glickman had reported. He said, I was briefed 2 hours before Glickman made his announcements. I wonder what the hell we've got in the Packers and Stockyards Act. We will answer any and all questions you have at the back of the room as you sign up. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming. Next question. Go ahead.
Who do you sell your cattle?
I sell the national feed.
There's a microphone there.
That was a real worry for me. In fact, I had almost an empty feed yard when I went to Washington and kind of planned it that way. And when I got back from Washington, I was real worried. My feed yard was dropping numbers. I was kind of cleaning things up, ready to just close the door if I had to. I went shortly after that meeting. I was invited to a meeting in Pierre, South Dakota, where I talked. Johnny and Herman and all of them and Leo were there. And I got home from that meeting on Sunday night, went to my feed yard the next morning, and the first guy through the door was the national packer buyer. And he said, how'd the meeting go? I said, what are you talking about? What meeting? He said the meeting in South Dakota. And I said, well, how'd you know about that? I just got back. He says, well, my brother-in-law, Tom Spencer in Pueblo, told me about it. Tom was on the Futures Committee that Pat was talking about when they tried to delist it. very, very active NCPA member and partner with John Lacey in a ranching deal in California. And so I think I am in big trouble. They know about it. I'm ostracized. My favorite Packer is not even going to come see me anymore. And Don Guilfoyle said, Mike, we just want you to know that we're all behind you, and we're on your side. And that I sell cattle to Nashville.
One question after that, is that something that you would offer as a suggestion to all those people that we sell their calves in October, and we could sell to people that would not be related to IBP?
I would certainly suggest that you check the feed yards that you potentially might feed with. Try to do business with feedlots that are non-captive supply type feed yards that are not on the formula. Yeah, try to promote a free open market and don't do business with those people. And try not to do business with those packers. Sell to packers that are independent, that are not dumb.
They don't offer the same as I mean, if you're going to take a 5 cent.
You're not going to take that much of a discount. You won't take a discount typically. The problem is the small packer has a major problem too. They have to compete with IVP. They dominate the market.
Folks, I just want to give you, when you talk about Mike's lawsuit, a lot of people say, oh, he's suing a big old corporation. There's no way he can win. I'm just going to read you a little something. In a recent ruling, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the decision of an Alabama court at ConAgra purposely misweighed chickens sold to them by 255 Alabama poultry growers over a 7-year period. ConAgra consequently deposited $17,200,000 in Alabama Bank for dispersal to the injured parties in order to settle the judgment. ConAgra only conceded defeat after 5 years of court battles in which they lost in every step of the way. During the period, some of the growers who had been cheated were forced out of business, but surprisingly, many of those who survived are still growing chickens for guess who? ConAgra. And don't forget, ConAgra is one of the big three. Okay, do you think this was by choice? How many of you would continue selling livestock to a market who cheats you at the scale? No, they wouldn't. They would sell them to someone else because fellow cattle producers, today you still have a choice. And Mike Calicrate's lawsuit, and I don't mean to call it your lawsuit, Mike, I'm saying the Cattlemen's Legal Fund, which Pat is part of, and so is Johnny Smith, has a very good chance, and they need support, and your support would be great. Thanks.
Mike, there's one thing that hasn't come out. Maybe you or Pat could address this, your short-term goal. What do you want to have? Talk about the cease and desist order, if you would, that you're after right away, and the dollar amounts that you shared with us the other day.
We think that it's very clear that the packers, particularly IBP with the formula, is in violation of the PNS Act. We would like to see a cease and desist order put in place that would eliminate captive supplies immediately, which would put $15 on the live cattle market, $30 on the calf market. We can't go into this fall with 50-cent calves. Banker from Eastern Colorado told me he'll lose half of his cow-calf people this fall if the calves are in the 50s. We need fast action, and we can't wait 5 years like Herman said on the ConAgra lawsuit. We've got to have something happen quicker than that. We've got a meeting in Amarillo Friday of this week to discuss our strategy, and we are certainly pushing this thing as hard as we can. We're bleeding at the jugular. We've got to have immediate relief. Right now, you asked about our bank account. The attorneys are doing this on a contingency, so you know they've got a lot of faith. They know they're going to win this case, or they wouldn't take it on a contingency, because it's going to cost a lot of man hours, a lot of attorney hours. But the problem with the lawsuit on contingency, you still have to pay the expenses. You've got a lot of travel expenses, deposition expenses, office, copying, clerical, and all that has to be paid. Right now, we've got about $32,000 in the bank. We've got commitments for more money, but it's going to take a ton of money to do this deal. But you think about the amount of cash that's going out on every cattle truck that leaves your ranch, and just think about if we can fix that, what it's worth to you. We've got to have support, and you'll get the support $100 at a time, if that's where you're going to get the most of it. We definitely need your support.
Pat, do you have something to say?
Oh, no, I was gonna mention, I know a way you can get the highest price for some of these feeder cattle is bring them out at the auction. You know, we had some 9-weight steers today at 65 and a quarter, and it'll be a good check, and all these markets, I had to put a plug in there somehow. You know, there is a way to do that.
Yeah.
I sold quite a lot of cattle last winter. Went to a quarter buyer, and all my cattle ended up being the Packer feed. Went to an order buyer Packer feed. I so happened to have a neighbor for $7 billion. His name is McMillan. He worked for Con Agri. And that comes from Forbes magazine. That's one by one of my ranches. That's pretty much on that. $7 billion, not million, $7 billion. A CEO.
Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to know if Mike could explain about Les Messenger's car. Who managed his car. Tell him who he is.
Les Messenger is a commodity broker. He holds a seat on the Mercantile Exchange in Chicago. Probably the most outspoken person in the business as far as packer concentration. Captive supplies. Those are the two things he's most adamant about, is packer concentration and captive supplies. They're talked about in every newsletter. He is, I don't know how many newsletters, he's been sending those out for years talking about this. He sends them out to over 2,000 people every week. And this guy has his stuff together. And he spoke at the NCBA convention last week. And you know, you look at the media coverage at the NCBA convention, I've not seen his name mentioned yet, not once. And he delivered one whale of a powerful speech down there. And he kicked their tail.
I've got a copy of his speech with me, by the way.
But he,
You're not going to read it, are you?
Les
Take
Messenger,
another half an hour.
Les Messenger pulls no punches, and it is clearly understandable when he says something. And Herman, was it you that asked him who starts his car? That's how that got started. Right?
Yeah, we had him, did we have him in St. Louis? We had him in St. Louis testifying, right, John? Yep. And, I mean, he has a newsletter, and I've got some copies of them, and I mean, he lashes out at corporate America, and that's, you know, I always kid him, I always say, hey, Les, who starts your car in the morning? That's a joke, a standing joke me and him had.
I've told Les more than once he's my hero.
Questions? Go ahead.
I guess I'd like to make one comment, and it's probably not to do too much with the beef industry here, but I think there's a good point that needs to be brought out here tonight. It's the sheep industry. We're going through the same struggles with that industry as the beef industry is. We have an upcoming checkoff vote coming up and all those issues. Some of the same struggles that the beef industry is going through. We need to coordinate our efforts as an industry, as agriculture needs to join together, like the Farm Bureau and this attempt here at this meeting, is have people communicate and try to make a point to our leadership of these organizations, which they are apparently not listening to many of us out here in the country. And there has to be an effort from everybody together, whether you're raising wheat, corn, sheep, cows, pigs, whatever. We need to get together rather than keep it struggling, each one by themselves, trying to hang ourselves some way to make somebody pay attention. We need to do it together.
Yes. George.
I guess there's, based on that, there's one thing I'd like to say. No matter what organization you belong to, or maybe multiple organizations, maybe you belong to a general farm organization and you also belong to a commodity group. You're the member. You keep their feet to the fire. You ask guys like me, you ask them the tough question when they're trying to formulate policy or they're making position statements about something. You ask them a very basic, simple question, and that should be this. How does this support me as a producer? And that's a real important question because, and I'll take a little liberty here, but in my dark and lurid past, you know, I work for state government, I work for the federal government, I work for the U.S. Senate. I've had a lot of experience with various and assorted organizations. And the problem, the real root problem gets to be sometimes is who do they represent? And part of the problem sometimes, of course, you got to follow the money trail to kind of come up with the answer to that. But the one best thing that you can do for yourselves and make sure that your neighbors do for themselves, whatever organization they belong to, when that organization is trying to tell you something, you ask them the basic question again. How does that policy support producers in Montana? And you get an answer from them, and if they can't answer it, then as a member you should suggest to them they're barking up the wrong tree. And it's just a little food for thought.
We got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, one more little thing. And WRC, Western Organization Resource Council, Northern Plains, Dakota Rural Action, you've been excellent support. You got good groups. I support you all, so I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
I don't have a question, but
Would you stand up so everybody can hear you?
I think the problem in agriculture has always been the same. You got organizations that belong to, everybody belongs to a different one, and never get together. Tonight they're talking about getting together. I think it's a good idea. I think the problem is, you all want to do some help, but I haven't seen anybody put up any money. Somebody said there's 100, a million, what? 20, well, a million people in Calgary. Well, let's just say there's a million. How many of you people are going to spend $100 in the next 3 days? $100 was $100 million in the bank. Would that help you? Would that do it? I think you can buy some judges, you can buy some lawyers. And everybody's in this business. You get it done. Money talks, the rest is fool.
I think for $100 million you can buy a farm broadcaster. Jack?
You're not going to make it without money.
I'd like to know how to take this kind of back home. You know, there's not very many people from where I come from that are here. How can you get this thing back to, say, Miles City? I'm sure, like, the Chamber of Commerce would be thrilled to pick on something like this to get more people. I mean, we got to get more people active in this thing. How do we take this thing back to Miles City or back to any other small town? How do we get this? I mean, is there like video or any way we can get this through? Well, I know Rick does, but there's got to be other ways too. And I'm sure any, like Chamber of Commerce or any of those people would be thrilled to put on something like that.
But this is the point, you know. That's what these organizations are for. That's what Farm Bureau is for. And if you're a member of Farm Bureau, then you need to go to your local officers and talk to them and get it on their agenda and tell them this is what we need to talk about. I mean, the worst thing you can do, if you don't mind my saying, and this is just personal opinion, the worst thing you can do is go start another organization to deal with this issue. That's letting organizations off the hook. You're the grassroots. You're the membership. You got to go to what, you know, play the cards you've got. If you're a member of the Farm Bureau, member of Stock Growers, member of the Grain Growers, or wife or Farmers Union, or what have you, make them earn your dues. Press them. But the trouble is you got to go to a meeting. It's a lot nicer to go out to the lake some Sunday afternoon when some local is trying to call a meeting. Well, you got to make those decisions on those sunny Sunday afternoons when the last thing you want to do is go to a damn meeting. But you got to do it, folks.
It's a good question, though, Jack. That's exactly the question you need to be asking yourself.
You bet.
And a lot of it you can do just by taking it over yourself and talking to your neighbors. If you go neighbor to neighbor, I don't know whether you guys realize this, but they say the average person knows 1,000 people by their first name. If you want to make an impact, talk to them. Anybody else? Yeah, Mark.
Well, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to defend NCBA a little bit because I think there's a lot of people here this evening that might come away with a bad attitude about NCBA. My name is Mark Bull. I'm from Sydney, and you know, Mr. Goggins made a good point. He said you got to help. And I remember listening to Perry Pendley, who's the CEO of Mountain States Legal Foundation, and he said that policy is dictated by those who show up. And if you don't go to your Montana Stock Growers meeting, and if you don't go to your NCBA meetings, to your policy meetings, and become involved, that's what's going to happen. I'm a young cattle producer, and I've been to 5 NCBA conventions. And I can guarantee that when you're there, it's not all people there that are rich and that they don't have anything else to do. Granted, there's a lot of people that are retired that go, that's their vacation. They take in what their business. But there's a lot of young people there too, and there's a lot of middle-aged people that are there that are dictating policy. And NCA, over the years, I've read the Beef Business Bulletin, I read it religiously. And I think that they support many of the issues that have been talked about tonight, as far as investigations and whatnot. But there's a certain degree as to how far they can go too. They've got to work with these individuals on the Hill. And they're doing, I believe that we are a grassroots organization. And we are made up of our members. You know, for years the industry has said we need a unified voice. So they took on a bold effort to unify and to have one voice in the beef industry. And now it's, you know, we need to get over some things and we need to work them out. Leo was in Bismarck this year and he said, I'm an NCBA member and I'm going to be an NCBA member. And the right way to go about it is to be a member and to bring your opinions to the meetings. You know, a comment was made at Nashville. Looks like a corporate meeting. What are we all doing in the summertime? It's hard to get away to go to a meeting in Nashville. It is hard. The guys that are there from the corporate side of it, they've got expense accounts and they're representing their companies, they're doing their job. And as far as corporations being involved with NCBA, that's a great way for us to generate dollars, because I guarantee that 99% of the people that are there because it's a feel-good thing for their association, for Syntax, for Mormon's Feeds, for down the line. If I can donate $10,000 to NCBA, I'm helping the cattle industry, and I can get my picture in their magazine, and I can do advertising for them. That's their avenue there. They're not there to run our business. They're there monetarily to help our business. That's their main goal. And I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Mark. With that, we're going to put the wrap on this one. The 1980s taught producers, and you guys remember how tough those were, taught producers to be marketers. If there's one thing that I can deliver you as insight from our network, is continue to market to your best ability. If that ability includes getting rid of formula pricing to enhance your market, it's going to do nothing but help you. We're in the information age. I'm proud of you for showing up here tonight, because there's hundreds of people that didn't. But also I encourage you to go tomorrow as well and pack the whole load of hay home. And like Jack said, share it. Keep in mind that who's on trial. I don't believe it's the beef checkoff that should be on trial. If you guys remember one thing about the Olympics in 1996, remember the security guard that was put on trial ahead of a whole nation by media without ever being arrested. Don't put the checkoff on trial yet. Hold them accountable for your dollars, yes, but don't put it on trial. And keep in mind that as we work through this information age, that I wholeheartedly agree as a farm broadcaster that we don't have price discovery. I was in a telephone conference with the Ag Secretary and one of the upper management people in a reporting service who stated to the farm broadcasters on that line that they report 65% of the cattle. And a lot of you heard me talking about this on the radio. If they kill 130,000 a day, only 5 days a week, it's over 400,000 head that you would be quoting under their 65% theory. On my best week, I get to quote about 180,000 that sell live.
The rest come from Mars.
The rest come from Mars. Make them report it. Make it mandatory. Make them report the price, how they're formalized, everything about their business, and then make them clean up their act. With that, my thanks to the Farm Bureau for asking me to come tonight. Let's give them a round of applause, and to your panel. You guys will be around, ask all the questions. you want, the sheets are on the back table back there by the coffee pot if you want to learn more about what they're doing with the litigation. Thanks for coming.